right, we're going to turn to the border now, where the number of unaccompanied minors that are being offered shelter by the U.S. has dwindled down to just 61. And that means despite laws protecting children traveling alone from speedy deportations, hundreds of unaccompanied minors that are seeking refuge have been denied asylum. CBS News is the first to report the impact of the Trump administration's expulsion policy of children on the border. So we're going to dig into this now. We're joined by Camilo Montoya-Galvez. You are CBS News immigration reporter, Camilo, and you've been really on this. I mean, really on every sort of breaking bit of information that we get. So tell me what's going on here. People might see, oh, just 61 unaccompanied minors are being sheltered. It wasn't that the problem before? We had too many unaccompanied minors. But that number is telling a tale because fewer children, it's not like fewer children are showing up at the border.
Good morning, Anne-Marie. You're correct. This is a seismic shift, and I'll tell you why. U.S. law requires officials to transfer children who arrive at the border without their parents or legal guardians to the U.S. Refugee Agency. These kids, as you mentioned, Anne-Marie, are protected from speedy deportations and allowed to seek asylum or other forms of humanitarian protection from deportation while in government custody with the help of child advocates and lawyers. That process has been completely upended during the pandemic. The Trump administration, citing the coronavirus, has been expelling most migrants at the border, including children. According to the data we obtained today exclusively, only 61 unaccompanied migrant children were allowed to stay and seek refuge in the U.S. in June. And there were more than 1,600 arrests of unaccompanied migrants at the southern border in June as well. So less than 4% of them were allowed to stay. That is a big shift.
So how has the administration been able to suspend legal protections created by Congress for unaccompanied minors during the pandemic?
That's a critical question, Vlad, because they say that this is not an immigration policy. The administration has been citing a directive by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. This is a directive that the CDC issued in March and that has been extended indefinitely, and that has allowed border officials to essentially suspend all these immigration laws, these asylum laws, these protections for these children, and to rapidly remove these migrants, because they believe that if they process these migrants like they were processing them before the pandemic, they could prompt outbreaks inside U.S. immigration jails and overburden public health resources along the borderlands.
So, I mean, what happens then to a minor who shows up at the border? You know, often they have traveled across a number of countries to get there and faced extreme dangers. Give us a sense of the numbers, how many are showing up, and then what happens once they're turned away.
Sure. So in June, in the numbers that we published today, there were more than 1,600 arrests of unaccompanied migrant children at the southern border. 61 of them were allowed to stay, go through the normal process, and transferred to the U.S. Refugee Agency, which has a network of shelters and other housing facilities for them. That is a big shift because last spring, that agency was holding more than 13,000 migrant children in its shelters. It is now holding less than 900, about 820 kids in its custody. So that is obviously a very big and notable change, but the administration, of course, has been trying to dismantle or at least limit all of these protections for migrant children even before the pandemic, because officials have said that these rules and these laws encourage migrants to illegally cross the border and encourage kids to take a perilous journey to the U.S. southern border.
Camilo, let's turn now to another story you're following. A California judge is extending the time that ICE has to release minors from detention facilities due to the coronavirus. Do we know what prompted the extended deadline?
Sure. So back in June, the federal judge in California overseeing litigation surrounding the Flores Settlement Agreement, which is a court consent decree from 1997 that affords certain protections to migrant children in U.S. custody, ordered ICE to release all children in family detention who have been held for more than 20 days. So these are kids who are being detained with their parents or legal guardians at 3 family detention facilities that we have here in the U.S. And the reason the judge did this was because coronavirus cases among immigrant detainees, including at the family detention centers, have continued to grow. And she said that could place these migrants at risk. But this is where it gets complicated. She does not have the authority, the judge does not have the authority to order the release of the parents because they don't have any rights under this Flores settlement agreement. Only the kids do. So ICE has 2 options to comply with her order, which has been postponed, the deadline at least, to July 27. ICE can release parents and children together. It has broad authority to do this, Vlad and Anne-Marie, or it can ask parents whether they would allow their kids to be released without them to sponsors. This is a choice that advocates strongly oppose because they say it would amount to family separation.
And so is ICE leaning in any particular direction?
Yes, they have signaled repeatedly in court filings that they are not looking to release all the families that have kids who have been held for more than 20 days. It looks like they will, again, as parents, because they have done this before, whether they would allow their kids to be released without them. The agency is holding about 300 parents and children, and advocates say that those low numbers point to the fact that the agency should be releasing them, especially during a pandemic. Because, as you very well know, Anne-Marie and Vlad, these families are not being held in criminal custody. They're being held in civil immigration detention, which is supposed to be designed to ensure that people show up to their court hearings and that they are ready to be deported if an immigration judge issues such an order.
Man, oh man, Camilo, great reporting. At a time like this when we're doing a lot of coverage of the coronavirus, we haven't really focused a lot on the border. And as we are seeing, this virus has a way of exacerbating problems that already exist. And that's what we're seeing happening at the border as well. Camilo, thank you very much.
Sure. And if I can add real quickly, we are going to be having a special here on CBSN on Sunday night called Pandemia Latinos in Crisis. And we are interviewing frontline workers, immigrants held in ICE detention, and other Latinos who have really been on the crosshairs, like African Americans, of the coronavirus. They have been hard hit by this pandemic. And so I would encourage our viewers to watch that Sunday night.
Well, Camilo, I wouldn't have let the audience go by without hearing all about that. I'll give them all the details. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And to what Camilo just said, here's where and when you can watch this. Learn all about the coronavirus, how the way it's impacting the Latino community by watching the CBS News special, Pandemia Latinos in Crisis. That is this Sunday at 9 p.m. and midnight Eastern. So if you miss it the first time around, you can catch it the second time around, or you can watch it both times. You can also go to cbsnews.com/pandemia for more